Come on, Shib. Come on. Is that what we got?
Daddy?
You were such a big boy when I was going. I'm so proud of you.
That is 9-year-old Luca Sestorino and his dad, Staff Sergeant Rob Sestorino, who came home to Tennessee a few days earlier than his son expected. Look at that. The Staff Sergeant was serving in Jordan and southern Syria. That is one of the best ones I've ever seen. That is so sweet.
So, Mayor Pete, let's talk about the military and what's been asked of them.
Afghan war veteran.
Since 2002. The rotations have been brutal. It's been continuous. People being pulled away from their families 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Sort of rotation that would have been unthinkable before September 11th. What do we do to take better care of our men and women in uniform? And do you agree with Donald Trump that we need to start bringing troops home from Syria and from Afghanistan and from across the world?
So a few things. First of all, one remarkable thing we saw a few days ago was Vote Vets, a progressive veteran organization, and a conservative veterans organization coming together to say that we've got to put an end to the forever wars, and Congress needs to reassert its war powers. Now, the reality is this isn't just a story of presidents asserting more and more executive authority. This is also a story of Congress kind of not wanting to get mixed up in that.
Right.
And so right now, we have troops around the world, I mean, East Africa, based on an authorization for use of military force that goes back to dealing with 9/11. You could be old enough to enlist today and not have even been alive for 9/11.
So let's talk specifics then. What would your policy be in Afghanistan? Would you bring the troops home from Afghanistan? Would you
yes, and look, the reality is the Afghanistan war is ending. The question isn't should it end or even will it end. The question is, will it end well or will it end badly? If you think about it, the one thing that everybody agrees on now, the American left, the American right, the Taliban for that matter, and the Afghan government, it's that the U.S. presence needs to end. How are we going to do it is the question. Now, the thing that makes me a little nervous about the dynamics in Qatar right now with this dialogue going on with the Taliban is it seems like the Afghan government's being left to the side. And the last thing we want to have happen is some kind of outcome that leads to another attack.
So what's your time frame for removing all American troops from Afghanistan?
Look, this depends on the dynamics that are being negotiated and what's on the ground. But let's say it's got to be a hell of a lot quicker than it's going right now. I mean, I thought I was among the last troops to be in Afghanistan when I left in 2014. That was 5 years ago.
What about Syria?
Look, Syria, we may have to have some kind of intelligence or special operations capability for the simple purpose of making sure that American lives are not at risk. And by the way, this idea that the threat is gone, that ISIS has been completely defeated, is not something that a lot of national security experts in our own military agree with. But more than that, you can't just say that everything's fine over there.
So would you agree that having 1,000, 2,500 troops over there, special ops troops like we've had to check the Russians, the Iranians, the Syrians, would we have that in your administration?
Some kind of very limited counterterrorism presence that involves intelligence and special ops, I can get on board with. But the idea that we're going to have an open-ended commitment, the idea that we're going to mobilize ground troops out there, or the idea that we don't even have a policy. Because remember, the President said we're getting out completely now, then suddenly, no, we're not. We literally don't have a policy. And the next president is going to have to establish a bar, I believe a much higher bar, for what it takes to do these kinds of mobilizations.
Finally, North Korea. It seems Donald Trump may be moving towards a denuclearization deal that would get U.S. troops off the Korean Peninsula. Is that something you'd support?
Yeah, here's the part that was actually encouraging amid the very messy and I think not terribly productive process that we've had with North Korea. But there's one thing that was important and interesting. Up until now, the doctrine has generally been that we have to achieve denuclearization first. That's our kind of table stakes. And then we can begin talking about peace. Now, now, with this dialogue going on, we're beginning to say maybe we start moving toward peace on the peninsula as the pathway to denuclearization.
And is that the removal of U.S. troops?
Well, eventually it's got to lead to that. Remember, technically, we're still at war over there.
Right.
And that's got to come to an end.
But is that a trade you'd make, removing U.S. troops from the Korean Peninsula, if North Korea has a verifiable denuclearization plan?
There's got to be more to it than that. But peace and stability on the nuclear peninsula is our goal. And if we can have that and denuclearization, we're in good shape. But remember, there are reasons benefiting both Koreans and benefiting Americans to have some kind of presence there. So it's not about getting out any kind of bases, for example, that we might have. We have to have forward projection capability. Okay. But what we're learning right now is that there's an opportunity for peace, but that the president has no strategy.
Right.
Mike.
Let's get back to Christ. He never saw color. He never saw class. He had faith that people would do the right thing to, and pray that people would do the right thing to others. I have not heard you speak about our problems with both class and color in this country. They are significant, they are deep, they are historical. Talk about that.
Well, I'm the mayor of a diverse community and a largely low-income community. People may not know this because they only know about Notre Dame. We're about 40–45% non-white, so we've got a lot of racial diversity, and we've got a lot of economic diversity. Our per capita income's just over $20,000 right now. Remember, we're still dealing with the legacy of having been an industrial city that saw our economy completely transform over the last 50 years. The most important job of an elected leader, and I say that I came to this the hard way because, I'm a policy guy, and I came out of the business world. So I thought, things that you can count, things you can measure, policy, that's what matters. And of course it does. But the most important job of an elected leader is to call people to their highest values and to bring them together. And that's particularly important when it comes to things like racial divisions among us. What we have right now is leadership, if you can call it that exploits those divisions, that uses race to divide us within, among other things, the middle class and the working class. And that is unbelievably harmful at a moment when people of color in particular in this country are feeling more and more under attack and more marginalized. And you've got people in majority who are basically having their resentment stoked. That is not a formula that ever made our community better off. Part of this goes back to policy. Right? The party's commitments to racial justice and social justice need to animate our policies. But a lot of it also goes back to the way our leaders talk about what made our country what it is and why we benefit from our amazing diversity.
Where would you place on a scale of important things that you as president would have to address the diminishing importance of community in this country, sense of community?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. First of all, it's one of the reasons why I think we need to look at national service. It can be voluntary, but at the very least, let's create more opportunities for more people to have a service year after high school, because that builds community. One of the experiences I had in the military was coming to learn and trust people radically different from me in their politics and their race and their generation, but you learn to trust each other with your life. You shouldn't have to go to war to get that kind of experience. And so that's one way we can build community. In a deeper sense, I think the loss of community is one of the biggest consequences of automation and artificial intelligence in the way they're changing work. It used to be you got a lot of community from the workplace because you knew that you would have a lifelong relationship with a single employer. And that was true whether you were a blue-collar worker at a production facility and your spouses get to know each other through the union picnics, or whether you're a white-collar worker at a CPA firm and you and your spouses get to know each other at the firm dinners. That model is fading away. People in my generation are likely to change careers more often than our parents change jobs. And this has serious consequences for our understanding of community, of where we fit in. And there are some very ugly things that will move in to fill the void if we've lost that sense of community, that sense of identity that used to come from the workplace. Things like white identity politics, things like extremism come in, things like the worst forms of nationalism come in, when we could actually be building out the best forms of nationalism, which is when you rally people around a sense of identity that we're building each other up, when community, even in the literal sense of the city, is part of how people explain how they fit into the world. Because there are tons of people in South Bend where they come and go from various occupations. I don't even know what they do for a living, but they're incredibly important in the community because of the role that they play in the arts or in activism or in some other way. We got to celebrate that, build that up. I don't know if that's a liberal idea or a conservative idea, but it's something I strongly believe needs support at the national level.
So there's a very large field of Democrats, and want to get a sense of what defines you from the rest of the pack. You're at a podium, a long line of Democrats on a stage. You have 30 seconds to introduce yourself. What's the message of your campaign?
Well, look, the reality is when you take one look at me, my face is my message, right? A lot of this is simply the idea that we need generational change, that we need more voices stepping up from a generation that has so much at stake in the decisions that are being made right now. It's why I often talk about how the world's going to look in 2054 when I get to the current age of the current president. It's to remind us that this isn't just about one election. This is about an era. The decisions that are being made in our politics right now will decide how the next 20, 30, or 40 years will go.
Is Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders too old to be president?
It's not my place to say whether anybody else ought to be president. And look, let's be very clear. You'll see older voters voting for younger candidates and younger voters voting for older candidates, and that's fine. That's good. Matter of fact,
has that surprised you on the campaign trail? I can say in my little foray, I was always shocked. I thought older people would loathe me. It was actually the younger people who loathed me. All the older people. They would come, they resented me. They said, you're too young to do this when I was 29. But it was the older people who said, you've got the energy, you've got the fight. I'm going to send you there, fight for me.
We had the exact same experience. Even when I was 29 running for mayor, we had just enough money to do one poll. And so we did a poll and we tested all my attributes. You know, if you knew Pete was whatever in the Navy, would you be more likely to vote for him? And there was a straight line correlation in the numbers that came back. That the older the voter was, the more likely they were to say me being 29 was a positive.
Right.
I can see it in the faces when I go to Iowa, when I go to New Hampshire. We've got a lot of young people, students who are interested or excited about the idea of somebody from a new generation stepping forward. But it's really people my parents' age are a huge part of those who are really interested in this. So, you know, this needs to be backed up, obviously, with a substantive account of where I think we need to go policy-wise.
Yeah.
But I also think tonally and just historically, thinking about the changes that are coming to our country and the fact that, as for our city, the big challenge for our country is mastering these changes instead of pretending we can stop them and rewind them. I think generational change in our leadership can really contribute something on that.
Mr. Mayor, we've only got a couple minutes left, so I want to tick through some of the prominent issues that have come up in the Democratic field over the last couple of weeks, knowing full well that each of these is an hour-long conversation. We'll get into it next time you're here. Would you support adding seats to the Supreme Court?
If it's part of a structure that depoliticizes the Supreme Court. So what I'm worried is, well, think about the trajectory the court is on. It's being regarded increasingly as a nakedly political institution. So the question isn't just, is it too conservative, although I think it is. The question is, how do we structure it in a way that it's not going to be an apocalyptic ideological battle every time there's a vacancy? That's why I've been really interested in this potential model where you have 15 justices, but 5 are chosen by Democrats, 5 by Republicans.
So you could see expanding the Supreme Court?
If it's in a way that will depoliticize it. If it's just a matter of adding people, then what's to stop conservatives from doing the same thing?
Would you support getting rid of the Electoral College?
Absolutely. It's got to go.
Medicare for all?
Yes. However, I also think that any politician who allows that phrase to escape their lips ought to have some account of how we're going to get there. That's why I've been talking about a pathway that I would call Medicare for all who want it. The idea is you make some flavor of Medicare available on the exchanges as a kind of public option, let people buy in, and if people like me are right, that this is going to be not only more widespread coverage, but also better and more cost-effective, that'll be a very natural pathway toward a single-payer or Medicare for all environment.
Do you support reparations for slavery?
I haven't seen a proposal for like cash transfer that people would be able to come together around and view as fair. But I absolutely believe that we need to have some kind of accounting for the persistent racial inequities today that are there by design because of past and present racism. And so it means our policies and our policy interventions on everything from criminal justice to housing need to be designed in such a way that they're targeting those areas in our economy and our society where racial inequity, largely driven by the legacy of slavery, but again, not just something that came out of the past, but something reinforced by present racial attitudes, where those are most persistent.
Do you support the idea of no fly, no buy, which is to say if you're on a terror watch list, you cannot purchase a gun?
Yes, I mean, look, the whole idea of our framework for gun safety is to make sure that people who are a clear and present threat can't get access to these weapons.
But as you know, some people on that terror watch list are there for no good reason. So
Well,
should
that's
they have
obviously
their Second
something that-
Amendment rights denied?
As a former counterterrorism officer, I also believe we need to tune up this system. But look, we can improve the system and also make sure that of all the problems with American safety, people who've been flagged as a terrorist threat not being able to get a gun in time because the flag might have been unfair is not the biggest problem we have in America.
So just listen to the conversation we've just been having, and to give you a sense of where we're at as opposed to where we are right here, the president just tweeted this. George Conway, often referred to as Mr. Kellyanne Conway by those who know him, is very jealous of his wife's success and angry that I, with her help, didn't give him the job he desperately wanted. I barely know him, but just take a look. A stone-cold loser and husband from hell.
What?
So will you be tweeting like that when you're president, Mayor Pete? All right, what do you think of the Trout deal? Are you a baseball fan? You don't have to be a baseball fan. You a baseball fan?
Real quick.
That sum of money is
A lot.
more than the budget. We got about a $300 million budget, cops, firefighters, sewers. So I'm just thinking about how many vacant abandoned houses we could deal with. And I could do our entire sewer separation project for that much. It'd solve a huge problem for us.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg, thank you very much. It's great to have you on and to have an extended conversation.
Please come back.
I'm sorry to dirty it up.
By the
with
way, call in
president's
anytime
tweets.
you want. You've got
All
a
right.
number.
Good luck, and we'll be right back with much more Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.